All right, so whenever you're ready, Tatiana.
Okay, so
Mhm.
awesome. Let me just see. Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the second meeting of the Purdue Intercultural Learning Community of Practice, or as we call it, the Pickle Cup. My name is Tatiana Babich-Williams, and I am the Pickle Cup organizer, also known as the person that sends a lot of email reminders about all this, right? I am really pleased to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Chris Etchison-Clare, who is Silmar's director and who also holds a courtesy faculty appointment in the Brian Lamb School of Communication. Her many responsibilities include overseeing the strategic planning for Silmar, management of intercultural learning specialists and their projects, and providing intercultural research support. Perhaps best known in intercultural learning circles for her article on representing the intercultural development continuum as a pendulum, and for her scholarly work with the BEVI, Beliefs, Events, and Values Inventory. And you have some of the lexicon, like the abbreviations that I'm using in the chat. Chris has also published book chapters and journal articles on a variety of topics, including the meaning of silence, emotion labor, and the assessment of intercultural learning in study abroad. Today, Chris is doing a virtual demo of a new experiential activity called Ethics Across the IDC, or Intercultural Development Continuum, and I am so looking forward to learning from Chris today. Chris?
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be doing this activity because we've been very busy over the past year or so creating lots of new experiential activities. We wanted lots of content in the Intercultural Learning Hub that was, resource rich with lots of downloads and ready to use, um, handouts and PowerPoints and those kind of things. And so in creating those activities, sometimes we have ideas of things we've done in the past or maybe something new we want to try out and we create all these materials, but we don't actually know how it's going to play out in different contexts. And so this is really kind of a playground. I see as an opportunity for us to try this out and get feedback. And so we're going to do part of the activity as it was designed, but then we're going to debrief in addition as facilitators, as sort of like with our teaching hats on towards the end. So be thinking about that as you experience it, kind of what your perspective might be as a facilitator, and we'll talk through that at the end. And that will be an important part of our debriefing process. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn to the activity. So let me share my screen and as this comes up, let me just give you a bit of background or context. When we created this activity, we really were looking for ways to dig deeper into the intercultural development continuum, find more ways to apply it and think through what impacts it has on relationships, on current events, all these kinds of things. So going beyond just the model itself and thinking through how it might have meaning in our day-to-day lives. So this is one of the outcomes of that brainstorming process of how to apply the intercultural development continuum. And I hope it goes well. So I'm going to dig in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking through the actual intercultural development continuum. I hope that's not a mistake, but I'm sort of assuming that this audience is already kind of familiar with this model. I know a lot of you are already intercultural development inventory qualified administrators, or at least have maybe taken the IDI and are familiar with this model. But if there's anybody that is not familiar with this model, I just wanted to throw this up and just give this reference point for you to show that it is this developmental continuum. It moves from denial through these different stages towards adaptation, and that each one brings with it a sort of worldview or perspective or orientation towards interacting across difference. So we're going to look at these slides that talk about these different orientations, but I'm not so much trying to define the orientations because, again, I'm sort of assuming that you're familiar with this language already. What I want to do is talk about these orientations relative to ethics. And for the purposes of our activity today, I'm really defining that word ethics as the right thing to do, or the way that we should be treating other people, or the course of action that we see is most appropriate. Okay. So keeping in mind that that's how I'm going to talk about ethics today. If we think about denial as an orientation, my understanding of the ethics of denial would be phrased something like this, that it's a good thing to treat people as people and not so much as cultural beings. That it's a good thing for people to stick with their own and maybe not interact so much with people who are different from them. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what I mean by my definition of ethics for the purpose of this activity. Let's look at a couple more examples here with these different orientations. If we think about defense or polarization would be another way of defining that orientation. When you think of the ethics of polarization, I'm going to open up the floor and invite anybody in chat or to unmute your mic. And can you articulate, can you think about what would be an ethic of polarization if you are in that sort of us versus them frame of mind when it comes to cultural difference? How might you articulate what you think the right thing to do is? I have some ideas, but just curious if anybody else has some thoughts about that. While you're thinking about it, I'll give you one more example, and you can also be thinking ahead to the other orientations as if you know that what's coming up next, minimization, acceptance, adaptation. So to me, one of the ethics of polarization is a strong sense of my way is the right way, and we should all be doing that. Okay. I see a couple of things coming up in chat. This is great. Oh, yes. Tatiana is very close to mine. Oh, I like this zero sum game. Yes, absolutely. So there's a competitive sense of ethics here, and that there's sort of winners and losers in that game. Yeah. Within the ethic of defense. Right. Oh, yes. This is very good. So in the us versus them, there's a sense of protection for your own cultural group, right? So sort of defending your own cultural group from dangerous outsiders or dangerous opinions of outsiders. Yeah, very good. Okay, let's think through minimization now. So minimization, to me, one ethic might be, and please continue in chat, or if you want to unmute, you're welcome to share. But I'll share one and see if anybody wants to add to that. To me, one ethic of minimization is to avoid conflict with people who are different from you. So I think people who are minimizing see it as a very good thing or a good strategy to try to get along with people who are different from them, no matter what that takes. So minimizing conflict. Any other thoughts? What might be an ethic of minimization? Very good. Yeah, not wanting to make other people feel uncomfortable. We're all in this together. Good. Excellent. Okay. Harmony, yes. Good. All right, so acceptance. Be thinking about how you might phrase this. Again, feel welcome to contribute. One ethic that I see in acceptance is wanting to extend respect for other cultures, wanting to deeply understand other cultures, so that there's this ethic of sort of making other people feel heard, making other people feel respected and understood. Yeah. So what else would you add to that? Yes. Sense of belonging. I'm not sure if that was for minimization or acceptance. I think it actually could go to either one. I think both of those could. I think anything that is more on the ethno-relative or the intercultural side of the continuum, that belongingness would be a value that people would have or an ethic. Yes, so excellent. So this idea of growing, learning, understanding, putting yourself out there to grow or learn new things, I think that's an ethic for sure. Okay. And then finally, we have adaptation. And I would phrase an ethic here as that the right thing to do is, when possible, to meet other people's needs, to meet other people's expectations when we're capable of adapting to what it is that they want from us. But certainly the ethic of being willing to engage in this very complex negotiation or dance of who's going to adapt to whom, I see as an ethic there. Anything anybody wants to add to that? All right. So feel free to keep typing in chat if you want to, but we're going to try to apply this now. So what this activity actually involves is some case studies. We're going to work through one all together, and then I'm going to show another one to you and send you into small groups to kind of digest and try to analyze and talk through not only what these things mean, but also how we feel about them and what our own perspectives are. So the first scenario that I want to share is this case study of the Atlanta Braves. And this one kind of hits close to home because I moved here from Georgia most recently. And although I lived some other places in between times, I was actually there in the Atlanta area in 1990, 30 years ago, when the Tomahawk Chop really, I can't even talk today, the Tomahawk Chop became like this big unifying thing in the community, because it was 1990 was the year that the Atlanta Braves went from worst to first. Like, they had always been a horrible team that never won anything, and all of a sudden they were winning every single game, and there was like Braves fever in the Atlanta area. So have I experienced that, and I mean, I can hear all of these different perspectives and really empathize with where people are coming from. And so I think it's a great case study to start with. So what we're going to do is watch just a little bit of a clip of a video, and then we're going to look at some different things that people have said about this controversy and think through which different orientations on the IDC are reflected in what people are saying and how they're expressing their perspective. And then specifically talking about ethics, what kind of ethical stance does that reflect, and what are the implications for those ethics? Like thinking through what impact that might actually have on people's lives. Okay, so let's dig in and watch a bit of this video.
For me, that's kind of the end of the story.
Take it back a little ways. If somebody can give me a thumbs up or something to let me know that you can hear the sound, or stop me, because actually I can't see the videos of the other participants' videos right now. If you'll just stop me if you actually can't hear the sound, that would be helpful.
For many fans over this year's World Series, but the team they're now playing,
it's all okay,
the Atlanta
thank you.
Braves, isn't without controversy either, especially as this.
Oops. What happened? Try that again.
Series shifts back to Atlanta tomorrow, where the home fans continue to make national television audiences cringe with their infamous Tomahawk Chop. Here's Eyewitness News reporter Mark Cordero-Robles.
As the Braves defeated the Dodgers in the NLCS, the packed Atlanta home crowds did what they have done for decades, what Braves fans call the Tomahawk Chop, something many Native Americans have decried as degrading and damaging for years. In an era when large corporations like Major League Baseball are moving away from offensive stereotypes, Atlanta's continued use of the chop was a topic reporters asked MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred about just before the World Series started. Manfred said, "It's important to understand that we have 30 markets around the country. They're not all the same. The Braves have done a phenomenal job with the Native American community. The Native American community in that region is wholly supportive of the Braves program, including the chop. For me, that's kind of the end of the story. In that market, taking into account the Native American community, it works." But the National Congress of American Indians responded. The Tomahawk Chop that the team exhorts its fans to perform at home games is meant to depict and caricature not just one tribal community, but all Native people. Consequently, the league and team have an obligation to genuinely listen to tribal nations and leaders across the United States about how the team's mascot impacts them. Native people are not mascots, and degrading rituals like the tomahawk chop that dehumanize and harm us have no place in American society. The controversy isn't new, of course. Former Braves owner Ted Turner, his then wife Jane Fonda, and former President Jimmy Carter all gleefully joined in on the chop when the Braves were in the postseason 30 years ago. But clearly, times are changing. Next season, baseball's Cleveland Indians will become known as the Cleveland Guardians, the team following the lead of the Washington football team in abandoning Native American names and symbols long viewed as racist. Mark Cotto-Robles, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
All right, so that gives you sort of the background and the the scenario, the case study. So what we're going to do next is look at some different slides that have quotations from people, surrounding this controversy. And what I want on each slide is for us to think about which orientation is being represented, and then what sort of are the ethics involved there. So feel free to use chat. Feel free to unmute and your mic and talk to us directly. But here,
the Braves and the Astros split the first.
There we go. Here's the first one. So I'm not going to read these word for word, but I'll give you a second to look at that first quotation. And of course, the first question that I have for you there is which, and let me just say also, I don't know that there's one specific right answer to this. I think some of these can be ambiguous. And so I'm much more interested in the conversation that's going to happen and not just getting a right answer. So any thoughts with this quotation about which orientation is sort of being reflected here is the first question that I have. We have a vote for defense in the chat or polarization. I hear more defense. I can definitely see defense in here. I think there is, I see another, more defense and some denial. I think there's some denial here too, like just a complete lack of understanding of what any of this has to do with culture, or even like that culture could be an issue. Maybe that's also sort of minimization because you're trying to avoid the conflict or sort of stay away from the risky sides of culture. Yeah. So I've got lots and lots of suggestions here, some denial, some defense or polarization, some minimization. Okay,
I
so
can't
let's
type fast enough, but
I know,
wanted
right?
to know your thoughts on the part where the person says might actually eliminate some of the championing of the culture. So this idea that by making this vast generalization that I don't quite understand, like I'm actually celebrating the culture, even though they're ignoring the fact that the culture you're trying to celebrate said that it is not a celebration. Like, how would you describe
Right.
that stance?
Right. I think that's polarization. To me, it sounds like my take on this, because my intent is to celebrate, then my perspective on this is the right one. And you really don't have any right to be offended by that. It doesn't really matter what the impact on you is, because my perspective is clearly the most logical one. That sounds like polarization to me.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions? I'd also like to move the discussion a little bit towards ethics, right? What are the implications of the ethics that are being expressed here for the speaker, for anybody who might be listening to the speaker, for anybody else who might be impacted? If the ethic here, the advocate, the action that's being advocated is to continue the tomahawk chop because it celebrates Native American culture, right? That's the right thing to do, and to stop being offended by it.
Well, this is debatable, but in my view, that the tomahawk chop is celebrating the Native American culture.
Mhm.
I don't think so. From my perspective, is that using some ritual to celebrate something else, but not the American native culture at all.
Yeah, I think it's interesting actually that there are two questions at the end of this quotation because they're clearly rhetorical questions. In other words, Doug, I don't think actually honestly wants an answer to those questions. He can't even imagine an answer to those questions. He's not willing to listen to an answer to those questions. And to me, what that does when you're in this polarizing ethic, then you're silencing people who disagree with you.
I agree.
Yeah, so we've got a hand up here. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so what I found interesting is that neither side really defined what the tomahawk chop means to them. What is the connotation within the Native American culture? You know, what has it been used for historically, traditionally? What does it mean to them? And how does the American Football League see it? They seem to see it. They seem to make the correlation. Okay, it's a war chant, so it is fitting that we are using it because we are fighting against a team, another team, right? So I think both sides are sort of jumping to conclusions without having laid the groundwork, done research, be curious about where does the other's attitude come from?
Right.
Why are they offended? Because that's what we always tell our students, right? Do some research about what you think might look awkward. Find out why people are behaving this way. Is there a history to it? Is there a cultural custom? Is there certain meaning, right? Symbolism. So that's lacking here.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge also the implications that Alith is talking about in chat about in this polarized sort of ethic that the opinion of Native Americans doesn't really matter. I thought it was actually kind of funny in the video that the I forget who it was that somebody in the Major League Baseball world was saying, well, they checked with the local Native Americans and they're all fine with it. But if you know anything about the history of Georgia, that's like sadly funny because there are so very few Native Americans left in Georgia because the Cherokee and all the other Native groups, you know, through the Trail of Tears were marched off to Oklahoma and many of them died and very few have returned. So kind of interesting there. All right, let's look at another one. Actually, Bing, did you have something you want to add real quick first?
Yeah, really quick. I just feel like this is a kind of example of cultural appropriation, isn't it not? Right? So I think if this is the case, then there is a problem. And I do believe it is the problem of denial. Like you're cherry picking what you think should fit, you know, your agenda, but not the others. So it's not you're not even recognize the legitimacy of the other culture. You're cherry picking the things that you like.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. I think I think it's a case of cultural appropriation. And when you look at it across the intercultural development continuum, how people feel about cultural appropriation or whether or not they acknowledge it as a problem is different, right? And that has to do with the ethics of their perspective. Let's look at just a couple more examples. Yeah, okay, so what do you think about this one? Being apolitical and trying to keep the focus on the field. What does that sound like? We've got some minimization, we've got some denial. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I see both of these things here. obviously there's an attempt to avoid the conflict. That sounds like minimization to me, but thinking about things as apolitical or assuming that baseball or any sport or any public discourse like this can occur in a vacuum and that we can just, pretend that all of this doesn't actually exist or matter, sounds a lot like denial to me. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Other orientations that you're seeing jumping out, or if you want to make any comments about the ethics of this. When you advocate for a course of action that tries to make something like this apolitical and says, let's just keep the focus on the field and not talk about all this cultural stuff, then what are the implications of that? Mm-hmm. Definitely. That so Elena says in chat that concerns about this don't matter. Right, that we define the focus, and the we in this case is Major League Baseball, the fans who are doing the tomahawk chop, the majority viewpoint, you might say. Oh, I like this phrasing that harmful universalism denies real lived experiences, right? Catering to the majority. Mhm. Yes, great from Michael that it's not just about what's on the field, it's also about what's in the stands. It's about what's with the viewers at home watching it on television, right? It's about everybody who's in the bars watching the game and talking about them afterwards and everything, right? Good. Awesome. All right, just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip ahead and there's a couple of discussion questions here. Just curious, and we didn't see a whole lot maybe that you would have really identified with, but which of these do you hear? So when you think about controversies, this particular one or anything like this, where there's sort of a minoritized group or historically marginalized group who's protesting cultural appropriation, just as an example, the perspectives that were expressed or that we talked about, what is it that you hear in your communities, in your classrooms? Are these resonant with you? Are they things that were surprising to you, or yeah, no, totally normal? I hear that kind of stuff all the time. This seems to be a group that likes to use your fingers to contribute, which is fine, but I'm just waiting for things to come up in chat. Yeah, so Elena says that things like this come up regularly. Oh, sage sticks. That's a great example. Mhm. Sort of cleaning environments or blessing environment spaces, right? That has been appropriated. Smudging, smoking. Oh yes, Halloween. Great examples. Uh-huh. Right. We've had conversations about mindfulness practices and yoga and these kinds of things that have been appropriated by Western cultures and white cultures. Thanksgiving, great examples. All right, so we're going to go to this next example again in the interest of time. This next case study, and there's a short video. It's actually quite a long video, but I'm just going to play a short piece of it to set this scenario for the case study. And then I'm going to send you away to some breakout groups. I'm going to make the breakout groups say about 5 people big, so they're big enough for you to have a little bit of conversation, but not so big that people don't have a chance to really express themselves. If you are willing to stay in the main group, when you get the invitation to join your breakout room, just ignore it and stay here because we're going to keep the recording rolling in this main room, just so that we have an example of the breakout room to put in the recording. So if you're comfortable with doing that, just feel free to stay in the main room instead of accepting the invitation to join. Or if you get sent away automatically, I'm not sure if that will happen to you, but if it does, you should have a choice to leave the breakout room and return to the main room. So to set the stage for this, this is also about Major League Baseball, but it's a case where these pundits, these sort of guys who are sports, commentators, are arguing about a Japanese baseball player who on television uses an interpreter so that he's speaking in Japanese and then someone is interpreting into English what he's saying, and sort of arguing about the role he has and the impact that that role has on how the sport is seen and whether or not people relate to it. So check out this discussion, and then we'll break up into groups and I'll give you some specific instructions, okay? So let's see.
All right, that could ingratiate himself with the younger generations out there and had America transfixed on the sport of Major League Baseball. What I'm saying to you is that's not the case. That's all I mean by that. I'm not taking anything away from Ohtani. I know what he's doing on the field. I know it's nothing short of spectacular. And I understand that baseball is an international sport itself in terms of participation. But when you talk about an audience gravitating to the tube or to the ballpark to actually watch you, okay, I don't think it helps that the number one face is a dude that needs an interpreter so you can understand what the hell he's saying in this country. And that's what I'm trying to say. In other sports, Max, like basketball, you notice, Dirk Nowitzki was German and Manu Ginobili and others were from other places. And guess what, Max? They spoke fluent English. You understood what they were saying when somebody was interviewing them. They didn't need an interpreter. It goes a long way. For some reason, with Major League Baseball, you got these guys that need those interpreters, and I think that compromises the ability for them to ingratiate themselves with the American public.
Okay, so hopefully you get the sense of the controversy there. I see a comment from Carolina. This is painful to watch, isn't it, though? Especially to us sociolinguists who feel so strongly about linguistic discrimination. But okay, so I was trying to set up breakout rooms in the background, and every time I clicked off the screen, it stopped the video. So give me just a second. I'm going to set up breakout rooms, and while I do, let me talk to you. So I am going to put a handout for you into chat. So let me go ahead and do that now while I'm talking. The handout has, instead of you seeing on the slides, the statements, it has all the handouts on, or all of the statements on the handout. So it's a PDF, so hopefully everybody should be able to open it. And if you'll just click on that and download it and open it, that has all the statements that you'll need in your group to talk through. Again, remember your task is to sort of think through the like which orientation is reflected there, but then really to focus in on the ethics and think about what behaviors or actions are being advocated there as the right thing to do, and then what implications that has, for the speaker, for, again, people who are hearing, for other people who are impacted in some way. So you've got the handout. Any problems with downloading the handout, just let me know. And now let me...
Which is what we...
Yep. Okay, so let me stop the share. And I'm going to go ahead and send you into breakout rooms. Again, remember, if you want to stay in the main room for the recorded discussion, that would be much appreciated. So let's see, breakout rooms, we have 26. I'm going to say 5 breakout rooms. And there we go. So I'm going to send you now, and let me know if there's any problems. All All right. And so folks who are staying here, it would be lovely if you would put your video on so we can actually see folks' faces. I really appreciate if you're willing to be recorded here with your comments. And let's talk through these statements. Okay, so quick introductions, just so we've got names and faces here. Annette, I know. And who else do we have here?
My name is Tina Denson. I'm the undergraduate senior admin for mechanical engineering.
Mhm.
I came to engineering from liberal arts. I was the admin there for the diversity, inclusion, and study abroad offices.
Mhm.
So these topics definitely they're near and dear to me. I definitely have an interest, and with engineering and STEM really striving to be better and do better with its diversity and inclusion and belonging. These are definitely lessons we need and I can share with my group.
Yeah, awesome. Annette, you want to do a quick intro just for the video?
I am Annette Benson and I serve in public relations for Silmar. And I'm thinking about offering this as a session myself at a conference. So I was particularly interested to hear it. That handout that you sent, is it a copy of the PowerPoint?
Nope. No, it's a new handout. It's a new handout that I create. You can't see it.
Is it part of the PowerPoint?
It is in the Hubicle now. So it's a handout that I created just today because I wanted to be able to send people to breakout rooms and I didn't want to send the whole PowerPoint to them. So it's just a one-page handout that has the content at about 5 slides from the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I can share my screen if that's helpful.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah, let me do that real quick.
Oh, I have it.
You got it?
Mhm, it
Okay.
finally came through.
It might be helpful for me to just flash it on the screen anyway, since we are doing this recording. So yeah, so here's what, oops. Now I've got all these things in the way here. Okay, so yeah, so it's just a one pager that has these statements that we're going to talk about. Okay, so here are the statements. We've got this apology kind of thing happening. We've got, well, let's just take this very first one. Okay, so this is Smith apologizing, and he says, "I screwed up. It was insensitive and regrettable." So, any thoughts about the IDC? What that has to do with the orientations?
I thought maybe Alan was acceptance because he's taking this broader view. He understands how it plays into history. He's looking at it from different perspectives other than the first one that came to him. I like that you're emphasizing that, because if it didn't have that first part of that sentence about with all the violence against Asian community, it would sound a lot more like just minimization, like I just want the problem to go away. But since he's really specific about really trying to understand another perspective, I do think that there's maybe some acceptance there. Yeah. So any thoughts about the ethics of that and what what the implications are?
I'm curious if he was taken to task by his employer and if that is what has caused him to have such an about face. Sports commentators tend to be very opinionated people and this is the hill I'll die on people.
All right.
I think it's just part of their persona. So I'm curious if he is genuine or if he's genuine because he wants to stay employed.
Well, it's interesting because it could be from an employer. It could also be a backlash like on social media.
Right. Who ultimately, those are his employers. I mean, they
Right. Yeah.
dictate.
Right. I think it's also interesting because part of what we didn't hear in the discussion is that he was comparing this all to the late 80s and early 90s and sort of the resurgence of baseball, and talking about the popularity of what was his name? I have just completely blanked on this guy's name. Mike, no, Mark,
McGuire.
Yes. Mark McGuire. So talking about sort of how he was like on the Wheaties boxes and really sort of brought baseball back into like the national sort of identity, really, as it had been in the past. And there was sort of, again, some romanization of it and some just the popularity of the sport in general, but it was because it had a face, right? And it was not coincidentally a white face, right? Because at the same time, there was this thing going on with Sammy Sosa. And so we didn't watch that part of the discussion, but I think it's really interesting because what he's not realizing is that it's a very different generation that is being appealed to now. And so the response that he got maybe not what he thought he was going to get, since he was sort of raised in a different environment than some of his current audience, maybe. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's look at number 3. So this is a criticism of Smith and what he said, but also really a criticism of the larger public if they agree with Smith. I'm just going to send out a little note to everybody that we've got about 5 more minutes in breakout rooms. So what do you think's going on there in terms of the IDC?
What's the last one? The one that had the lamb. I'm a visual, so the picture of the lamb getting bottle fed. That I feel like
that's adaptation.
That.
Adaptation.
Yes. It's almost like he's like, they're the problem. He's not the problem. It's defending him, protecting him almost.
But when you're defending a stance, defending somebody, then that sounds like defense in polarization. So I find this one really tricky. Is it?
Yeah, I think it is complex because I can see some adaptation, some sort of perspective taking that puts him in the shoes of this Japanese baseball player and how he might feel and what the ethical implications of how he's being treated are, right? But there's definitely, I think, some polarization going on against the majority culture. So any thoughts about what the ethical implications then are for resolving the conflict? If this is the way that you approach it, that has that sort of flavor of polarization, what impact could that have?
Well, if you're in polarization and you grow, you turn into minimization. So it could look like if you're really being big, then you would find how we're all similar instead of how we're different. That could feel really like you'd really done something big.
Right. I think sometimes polarization, especially if people are in a majority culture and are feeling critiqued, can cause a backlash of, and maybe it's shame-based, maybe it's anger based, but it can sometimes cause a backlash of, digging their heels in and taking a stand that no, they're actually right, instead of encouraging discourse or dialogue or negotiation or listening, if it comes across as very critical. What about the last one? Annette, what you were saying before, this one seems even more like acceptance than the last one, because you've got this detail about who he is as a person and how that helps him empathize, right? Is there any flavor of adaptation in here?
I don't want to be snarky, but I kind of defer to my colleague who inferred that these sounded like officially written statements. The African-American man that I saw saying what he really thought does not sound like the same man who's reading this statement. Somebody put these words in front of him as the official right thing to say.
Yeah, I love that contrast between, because he's very
Please don't show this video to him.
right. He's so emotive though, right? He's so passionate about what he's saying, and this sounds very
We're a sports
formal and
household.
official.
Unfortunately, I've seen him pontificate about a lot of topics that are sports related. So,
Yeah.
he gives lip service to a lot of stuff.
I think that's
Yeah.
why I wanted to see you facilitate this, Chris, because
Mhm.
I don't come from sports. And looking at this ahead of time, I was like, well, it's like when I used to have to facilitate this thing that was about Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson. And inevitably, before it was over, I would say Michael Jackson because they were just names to me. I knew what the script was, and
All right.
that's
That's
how I
funny.
feel. There's people who know way more about this Stephen A. Smith than I do.
Well, Annette, you may or may not know this about me, but I often don't even know which sport is in season. So I'm not exactly a sports person, but I can see, I mean, we're talking about sports as an example here, but we're not really talking about sports at all, Anyway, so I think what I wanted to say here about why I wouldn't put this in adaptation at all is that I don't see there's a I shouldn't have done this and an attempt to empathize and take the perspective, but there's no course of action given that would be ethically adaptive, right? There's no alternative to the way that he actually behaved. There's just apology, right?
I mean, there's no acknowledgement of why did I feel this way? Why do I not recognize, hey, maybe his culture requires him to be above and beyond polite, and that misspeaking in English for his culture is, a detriment. It's not like he even examines any possibility as to why, other than he should not do. Yeah.
Well, everybody's going to be wandering back in here from the breakout rooms in the next few seconds. So just a heads up that you'll see the participants start to populate again here in just a second. But I wanted to thank you again for being willing to be in the recorded group here. And if either of you want to share anything that we talked about with the larger group, that would be awesome. I'm not gonna do that, but I'm gonna invite people from each group to see if they want to share some insights that they talked about. So be thinking about what you might want to share with a larger group. All right, folks are coming back. Hopefully you had some fruitful discussions. We're again just trying this out online for the first time, so it's hard to know how much time to give you in breakout rooms. I tried to gauge it based on our own discussion in the main room. So hopefully you had enough time to get some insight, but not so much time that you felt like you were bored or wasting time. So I've got a few debriefing questions for you, and the first couple questions really are about the experience of the activity themselves, but itself. But then I want to pretty quickly move towards putting our teachers' hats on and thinking through the facilitator's perspective. So the first question I have for you is just to share insights that you may have come to in your breakout rooms. So if anybody wants to share with a larger group a takeaway that they got or something particularly insightful that was shared that you want to reshare with the larger group, anything like that would be great. So you can unmute and talk to us.
I'll just mention that I think it's useful to note that the way that we interpret, the way something is said, or the way that we read something, the way that we hear it, can frame the stage that we're discussing. So we were all over the map based on the way we read the passage. And I think that can happen in life as well.
Absolutely. That is so insightful, because the way that we hear things often has a lot less to do with the other person and a lot more to do with our own place on the intercultural development continuum. You know, how things resonate with us, or how we interpret the other person's intention, or all those kinds of things. And again, to reiterate, I don't think that there are, you know, one or a couple of right answers to these questions of where things lie on the continuum or what the implications are. But I think that having prompts like this is just valuable because it gets us talking about it and thinking about it. So thank you for pointing out that it really is all over the map whenever you ask people to analyze these comments. And I'm kind of okay with that. Other thoughts, things you want to share from your group?
This isn't from our group, but it did remind me of Aletha has been encouraging us when we facilitate and when we do sessions with other people that we not freeze others in time. And it made me realize the power of video to freeze people in time. We give Stephen Smith no grace to have grown. He's simply stuck there where he is on the video. It reminds me so much of, I used to do this session with Willie Cruz in which we would show Joe Biden in making a he said something bad about Barack Obama in an election cycle when neither had been president yet. He said that he was articulate and clean, and we would talk about why Barack Obama would take offense to these things historically whenever Joe Biden thought it was a compliment. And we would talk about, between me and Willie, that he would never ever be president, that he'd shot himself in the foot. Well, not only did Barack Obama allow him to grow, he allowed him to be his vice president, and now he is the president. So again, just that we freeze ourselves in time sometimes, but actually we should give one another the ability to grow across the IDC.
I love that perspective too, because if you noticed, I don't know if this struck you or not, but in the handout, actually like 4 of those statements are from Stephen Smith. And so they represent lots of different places on the spectrum and very different attitudes. And they're at different points in time and have different influences and motivations, but people are complicated, basically, right? And they do change over time. So thanks for pointing that out. Okay, so in the few minutes that we have left, I want to invite the facilitator perspective. I'm really interested in what was challenging about this activity for you, and if you were going to use something like this, you know, case studies where you talked about where the perspectives are on the IDC or what the ethical implications are, how you might adapt this, because, you know, different learners have different needs, and in different contexts, I'm sure it would need to change. So again, what's challenging about it, and how might you adapt it if you were to use something like this?
Chris, I would say that I'm a lot more familiar with the IDC than I am with maybe conveying different forms of ethics. So if you could provide some context to that side, that might be a bit helpful for some.
Yeah, it's tricky because a lot of people, I mean, there's lots of different definitions for ethics, and there's lots of different ways that those discussions play out. And I tried to provide just a very simple definitions for ethics at the beginning, but even so, it's just a difficult thing to talk about. I think this activity would be very difficult with like undergraduate students, with people who are not used to very honest reflection and sort of deep critical thinking. And maybe harder for people who are outside of the social sciences or humanities who aren't used to talking about ethics anyway.
I had read the first case study in advance in the hub, and so it was easier for me there to focus on what you were asking of us. But I think that it was, if you weren't already somewhat familiar with it, you know, that there was enough emotion and intake that it might have been hard to shift away from, you know, the video presentation to get to thinking about the quotes. So that's something that struck me. And for the second one, I had a harder time because I wasn't as familiar in advance.
Yeah, so that's really insightful. People may need some time to prepare. I think definitely they need time to prepare with the IDC in general. So introducing in a completely different intervention, or, you know, training or lesson, or however you conceptualize these kinds of learning experiences. But talking about the IDC first in a totally different activity, and then doing some kind of application like this. But also I take Aletha's point, it might be useful for them to read about or watch the videos or think about the case studies in advance, and then have that foundation to concentrate on the analysis specifically within the activity. That's a good point. Yeah. We have time for one more, I think, comment or
as
yeah.
the facilitator, to have at least some cliff notes of the cultural context that really matters to both scenarios. So even the importance of the particular sport in American culture, or what that Talk Time radio show was, because in our discussion, we weren't even really clear on the point of that debate, or why, you know, such a pointed view might be given. So that you can have a better understanding, because depending on who's in the group, they might not be able to bring in that insight. Like when you mentioned local to Georgia and Trail of Tears, like I didn't know that specifically as a thing for Georgia before.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it is challenging for facilitators. We did make a lot of notes in the PowerPoint, just to give some caveats and some tips and some things to watch out for, and you know, things to think about from the facilitator's point of view. But I think that's more with the actual quotations and less with the scenario itself. So that probably is very useful for us to go back and add some more facilitator notes just about the background of the case study in general, and the context, the U.S. cultural context that's at play there. Excellent. Well,
I also think I'm sorry, on the notes of that, I think maybe also more than one example that is similar to each or related. You know, when I was reading the one about the tomahawk chop, me having studied in University of Illinois, I went and looked up the whole Chief-Alainawek controversy. I was there when it was not controversial, honestly, and I know some things that are not mentioned in the articles as well. So, you know, maybe provide, you know, 2 or 3 examples about, you know, about using traditions, I guess, or elements from a culture, and then 3 elements about like this baseball thing, and then 3 elements similar to the third case that was there. So like, you know, 3 similar situations, basically 2 or 3 similar situations.
Good. All right, one final comment, and then I think we're out of time.
If I may, Chris, I would see it as a challenge to decide with whom, with which audience I would like to engage with these activities. Like, where could they be on the spectrum, on the IDI spectrum, right? Would they have to be in acceptance or adaptation already to be able to analyze these? Or could I, you know, I'm thinking of student engagement, right? Could I use a lot of activities too with them, but
it's a good point. I don't think it's
pointer.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's a good question and a good point. I don't think it's particularly helpful if with a room full of people who are in denial. But I don't think, if people are honest and reflective, I don't necessarily see so much of an issue of where people are on the intercultural development continuum, as much as how willing they are to do some honest reflection and some deep thinking and some sort of social critique, if you will. So graduate students, you know, faculty and staff, professionals in some fields, I would hesitate to do this with undergraduate students unless they were really studying, you know, intercultural communication or something like that, already had the background with the intercultural development continuum, and were in a space to go deeper. Good. All right, well, we are out of time. Tatiana, if you want to conclude for us and tell us about the next Pickle Cup.
Yes, I would just like to announce our next Pickle Cup, which is it's going to take place on December 6th from 2:30 to 4 in, let me just read that, Ralph Heine Pharmacy Building 162. So this is going to be an in-person meeting, and our presenter Annette Benson will teach us some effective and fun ways to review the intercultural development continuum, so IDC, and using Kahoot, card games, and other fun activities. And if you register before December 1st, you may win a prize. So please register. Okay, so thank you, everyone. And thanks for participating. And thank you so much, Chris. This was really, really fun and enlightening in many ways.
All right, thanks. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.